Welcome to our introduction on SVG code. So as you might have guessed, SVG is an acronym. It stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. Scalable means you can change its size. Vector is a type of graphics. There's generally regarded to be two types of graphics, vector and raster, so it's the vector type. And of course, graphics, which is what SVG is used for. It's used to make graphics. Using code, we build graphics from shapes. We combine circles and squares and triangles or different polygons or lines or whatnot, and we can make something. So we have our little picture, which is a rounded rectangle, and inside of that rounded rectangle, or on top of it, is a circle. And below that circle, we have a funky polygon thing. And that graphic is a vector-based graphic. I could make that graphic as large as I wanted to. So, are they special? Is SVG special? In a way, it's kind of neat to create something from code, but the other aspect of SVG is that it's the most common type of vector graphic. As I mentioned before, you have two types, vector and raster, which is also sometimes called bitmap. The key difference is that bitmap is created by little dots of color, one by one. We have a graphic on the left side. If it is in the bitmap format and we zoom in, these dots get blurry because the computer is just enlarging the dots. However, if we're using vector graphics, you're using mathematical concepts like shapes, and so when you make it larger, the computer just redraws a nice pretty circle. Now you might say, well, I can have a circle using bitmap. Well, you can, but it's just a bunch of dots in the shape of a circle. It's not actually a real circle. So when we have this nice arc, and you enlarge it, and it's just a bunch of dots in the shape of an arc, it gets blurry or pixelated. But that's not true if it's made from vector. So this is what it looks like, at least in code form. Of course, when it's done and you actually run it in something, you'll see graphics. But this is what it's made of. It's made of coding. Now, it's not programming. There is a difference. Programming is coding, but not all coding is necessarily programming. There's also markup, and that's what SVG is. SVG is a type of markup. So markup can be used to make things, but it can't do any math. And typically when we talk about programming, programs can do math. You can do equations, you can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, finding remainders, and all sorts of combinations of that. But markup can't do any of that. Markup just displays things where you tell them to display. More or less. There are some forms of markup that can be a little bit more advanced, of course. But generally speaking, that's what it is. You define how you want something to display, like graphics. And there's almost just as much markup running as there is programming. You use markup language every day, at least as a user and not as a coder. Every website that you visit has markup on it. Markup is one of the core languages of the web itself, is a markup language, HTML. So this might look crazy right now, but that's okay. It doesn't have to look crazy. We're going to start simple, and we'll get into some more sophisticated things as we go along, and you can decide how complex you want to make yours. And so, will this be hard? That's really your choice. It could be hard if you want it to be, if you want to really challenge yourself and do some really interesting things with it, but it can also be simple. You can understand the basics of this even without having to make something really crazy. And then lastly, what do you need? So you could download a special code editor, but you don't need that. You could even use something like TextEdit or Notepad. If you're on a Mac, you're looking for this, TextEdit, which you can also search for. If you're on a PC, you're looking for Notepad, which should look something like that depending on which version of Windows you're running. Now there are other softwares that you probably have on your computer that you might think, hey, I'm going to use that instead. Like if you're on a PC, Word, or if you're on a Mac, Pages. You want a plain text editor like TextEdit or Notepad, something that looks boring. If you can change the font, if you can change the color, the size, probably not a good thing because there's extra code behind there that's going to not work well when you try to make an SVG file. So you want something basic like TextEdit, Notepad. If you want something more sophisticated, look into a code editor like brackets. Notepad++ will probably work. And there are other ones out there as well that you can of course look into that can probably write SVGs just fine. So that's it for our little introduction, and in the next video we'll actually make something.